A struggling single father, running late to the most important interview of his life, makes a choice that seems to cost him everything. But what he doesn't know is that his act of kindness will change his life forever. The morning began before. The sun, in a cramped apartment where silence never stayed for long. The alarm clock rang with a sharp tone, and a tired hand slammed down to silence it. The single father pulled himself out of bed, his body aching from working late into the night before. His child still slept soundly in the corner of the room, tucked beneath a thin blanket, breathing softly. For a moment, he lingered, staring at that small, peaceful face, letting it fuel him the way coffee never could. His world had shrunk down to one mission: to provide, to protect, and to dream of something better. The rent was behind, the fridge was half empty, and the bills kept piling up. But today was different. Today was a chance. He had an interview at a prestigious company, the kind of opportunity that could end the endless cycle of small jobs and replace it with stability, respect, and a real future for both of them. He laid out his only suit the night before, carefully pressing it so that no crease remained. It wasn't new, but it was clean and sharp. He hoped it would help him look like the man he knew he could be. As he got dressed, he rehearsed answers. In his head, imagining what he might say if asked about leadership, dedication, or responsibility. Responsibility, he knew that word better than most. Every meal on the table, every late-night shift, every sacrifice was proof of it. He couldn't afford to fail today, not after everything he had been through. He checked his watch anxiously, then kissed his child's forehead gently before leaving. He whispered a promise, half to himself, half to the sleeping child, that things were about to change. The city was alive with its usual chaos. Buses honking, people rushing, and cars clogging every corner. He walked quickly, adjusting his tie, his resume carefully tucked in a folder. Every second mattered, and he calculated the time in his head with growing tension. If he stayed on course, he would make it right on schedule. But fate had a different plan. Just ahead, he spotted a woman struggling by the side of the road. Her car hood was open, steam curling into the morning air. She looked panicked, helpless, trying to wave down passersby who only glanced at her and kept walking. At first he hesitated. He knew what was at stake. Stopping meant risking everything he had worked for. But something in him, that quiet moral compass built over years of hardship, refused to let him turn away. He slowed down, his heart pulling in two directions, the interview and the stranger. His conscience won. He approached, his voice calm, asking what was wrong. Her words spilled out quickly, explaining that the car wouldn't start and she needed help urgently. Without thinking twice, he rolled up his sleeves, set his folder down carefully on the curb, and bent over the engine. Time ticked mercilessly while he worked. He used what little mechanical knowledge he had, tightening, adjusting, and wiping sweat from his forehead. When that didn't work, he called for a tow truck on her behalf, making sure she was safe and not stranded. The woman's gratitude showed in her eyes, but his watch told another story. Minutes had turned to nearly an hour, and the pit in his stomach grew heavier with each second. When he was certain she was safe, he grabbed his folder, offered a polite nod, and dashed down the street, running as if his entire future was slipping through his hands. By the time he reached the tall glass building of the company, his chest was heaving, his shirt damp with sweat. He straightened his tie quickly and pushed through the lobby doors, trying to mask his desperation. He rushed to the reception desk, breathless, explaining that he was here for the interview. The receptionist checked the schedule and gave a polite, regretful look. The panel had already moved on. He was late. Too late. It filled the slot, and there was nothing more they could do. He pleaded softly, asked if there was any chance, but the answer remained the same. Rules are rules. His shoulders slumped as the weight of disappointment crushed him. The opportunity he had prayed for, prepared for, dreamed of, had slipped through his grasp because he had chosen to help a stranger. He walked back out into the city streets with heavy steps, the folder still in his hand but now meaningless. Sounds of traffic and chatter felt muted, like the world was moving on without him. He thought of his child waiting at home, thought of the bills waiting on the kitchen table, thought of the promise he whispered that morning. His heart ached with regret. He had done the right thing, but it had cost him everything. as he disappeared into the crowd. He believed the dream he held onto so tightly had just vanished forever. He walked through the door of his apartment with slow, heavy steps, forcing his face into a faint smile the moment his child came running toward him. The small arms that wrapped around his waist almost broke him, for they had no idea what had just slipped through his hands. He set his folder down on the table, the one that still held his resume, crisp and untouched, and crouched to meet the eager eyes that searched his face for answers. "How was it?" the child asked innocently, and he managed a nod, hiding the storm in his chest. "It was fine," he whispered, ruffling their hair, careful not to let disappointment leak into his voice. That night, after tucking the child into bed, he sat alone at the table, staring at the stack of bills that seemed taller than his hope. The silence of the room pressed down on him, and for the first time in years, he let his head fall into his hands. Doubt clawed at him relentlessly. Had he been foolish to stop? Was kindness worth it if it meant sacrificing the very future he had been chasing? He thought of the stranger, of the lost time, and the cruel irony that the right choice had led him to the wrong outcome. But somewhere across the city, the story was taking shape differently. The woman he had helped earlier sat in a sleek office, high above the bustling streets. Her day had been full of meetings and deals, yet her thoughts kept returning to that moment on the roadside, the man who had stopped without hesitation, who had sacrificed his chance at something important just to make sure she was safe. She could still picture the sincerity in his eyes, the way he had brushed aside his own urgency to focus on her. She had seen many ambitious men, but rarely one who put others above themselves. And then when she learned his name, the recognition hit her with quiet force. He had been scheduled to interview at her company that very morning. A twist of fate, or perhaps something more. Curiosity stirred, and with a few quiet instructions to her assistants, she began to look into his background, not as a CEO searching for an employee, but as a woman intrigued by the strength of character she had stumbled upon. The father knew none of this. To him, the days that followed were a blur of job applications and rejection emails. He picked up part-time shifts where he could, washing dishes, unloading deliveries, doing anything that would stretch the little money he had. Each night he returned home tired, but still wearing that same faint smile for his child. Together, they made small joys out of nothing, cooking simple meals, turning broken toys into games, and telling bedtime stories spun from thin air. One evening, as they sat at the table eating a modest dinner of rice and beans, his child looked at him and said, "You always tell me to help people, even when it's hard. Did you do that today too?" He swallowed hard, blinking back the sting in his eyes. "Yes," he replied softly. "And even if it costs something, we do the right thing. Always." Those words, spoken more for his own soul than the child's, reminded him of the values he refused to abandon, no matter how heavy the world became. The CEO, meanwhile, read reports about him that told a different story than the thin folder he had carried into her lobby. She saw a man who had worked tirelessly, taking on shifts most wouldn't touch, always holding a steady record despite the odds. She saw references from people who praised his reliability and his kindness. And she found notes about the sacrifices he had made to raise his child alone, never once faltering in his role as a parent. The picture became clear. This was no ordinary applicant. This was a man who embodied integrity in a way resumes rarely captured. She sat back in her chair, considering her next move. She could easily summon him with authority, reveal herself as the one he had helped, and offer him the job outright. But something told her to wait, to see him again outside the walls of an interview, to know whether the man she had glimpsed on the roadside was truly who he was in everyday life. So she set her plan quietly in motion. The father carried on, unaware of the eyes now watching his path. Each day he walked his child to school, carrying their backpack when it seemed too heavy, offering encouraging words even when he himself felt defeated. He sat in libraries filling out applications, sometimes slipping coins into the vending machine, to buy a small treat for his child as a reward for patience. On weekends, he found odd jobs around the neighborhood, cutting grass, fixing fences, anything that would keep the lights on for one more month. His heart was weary, yet every evening, when he heard his child laugh, he felt a spark of strength return. Then, one afternoon, as he sat on a park bench, watching his child play, a shadow fell across him. He looked up, and there she was, the woman he had helped. But this time, she was dressed casually, without the polished armor of wealth and status, smiling as though their meeting was nothing more than coincidence. She greeted him warmly, thanking him again for what he had done that morning, making it seem like a chance encounter. He nodded politely, still embarrassed that he had nearly missed his future because of it. About his day, about his child, about his work, and he answered honestly, never suspecting her true identity. As they spoke, there was a glimmer in her eyes, as if she was weighing every word, every gesture, searching for the proof of character she already suspected. Was there? For him, it was just small talk with someone he had once helped. For her, it was confirmation. The man who had sacrificed his opportunity for kindness was not acting in a single moment of impulse. He was living a life defined by it. And though he had no idea, the second chance was already unfolding before him. A week after their chance encounter in the park, the father received a phone call he never expected. The voice on the other end was professional and polite, telling him that a position had recently opened at the very company where he had missed his interview. They explained that the hiring manager wanted to give him another opportunity to meet if he was still interested. His heart raced as he listened, torn between hope and disbelief. After days of rejection and endless labor just to keep food on the table, the thought of a second chance felt almost unreal. He agreed immediately, his voice steady, but his hand trembling as he hung up the phone. That night, he sat with his child, telling them that maybe things were about to change. The smile that spread across that little face was all the reassurance he needed. He pressed his suit once again, rehearsed his words again in the dim light, and prayed quietly that this time fate would not be cruel. When he walked into the company's towering building the next morning, he carried himself with the quiet determination of a man who had been humbled by disappointment, yet still clung to hope. The receptionist greeted him warmly this time. Instead of leading him to a crowded panel, she directed him to a private office. It was a large, sunlit room with shelves lined with books and awards, and a commanding desk that suggested authority. Behind it sat the woman he had met twice before, though he still did not realize who she truly was. Today she was dressed with the polished elegance of someone in power, but her smile carried a warmth that eased his nerves. She gestured for him to sit, and he lowered himself into the chair. Gripping the folder in his hands like a lifeline, the conversation began gently. Not with technical questions about his resume or experience, but with questions that caught him off guard. She asked him what he believed mattered most in a workplace. She asked what he thought leadership meant. She even asked about the hardest decision he had ever made. He paused, thinking carefully before answering, never dressing his words in false confidence, only speaking the truth he knew from his life. He said leadership was not about power, but about responsibility, the kind that had no breaks, the kind that forced you to make choices even when you were exhausted. He spoke of sacrifice, explaining how being a parent meant putting someone else's needs before your own every single day. And when she asked why he had helped a stranger on the morning of his interview, his voice softened. He admitted he had thought about walking away, but he couldn't. He said that if he had taught his child to always do the right thing, then failed to live by it when it mattered most, he would be nothing more than a hypocrite. His eyes lowered. As he finished, almost ashamed, because in his mind, that choice had cost him everything. There was silence for a long moment, and then the woman leaned forward, her expression unreadable. "Do you know," she said slowly, "that the stranger you helped that morning was me?" His breath caught. The words seemed impossible, but her gaze held steady, leaving no doubt. He sat frozen, his mouth slightly open, searching for words that would not come. His face burned with embarrassment as realization washed over him. All this time he had spoken so openly, never once considering that she had already seen him at his most vulnerable moment. He stammered, apologizing clumsily for being late, for missing the interview, for everything that had gone wrong. But she raised a hand gently, stopping him. She told him that what he saw as failure, she saw as proof of character. She explained that she had seen countless applicants with polished resumes and perfect words, but very few who would choose to do what he did that day. She said integrity was rare, and no company could teach it. Skills could be learned, but values, like his, were priceless. Then, with a calm certainty that made his heart pound, she offered him a position, not just any job, but one that could lift him from survival into stability, one that would allow him to provide for his child with dignity and security. He sat stunned, gripping the arms of the chair as if the room might spin. All the nights of exhaustion, the countless sacrifices, the disappointment of believing his chance was going to null of it, collided with the reality that stood before him now. Tears pricked at the corners of his eyes, though he blinked them back, quickly unwilling to break down in front of her. He managed a shaky thank you, his voice thick with emotion. But even that felt too small for the magnitude of what she was giving him. The woman smiled, leaning back with the ease of someone satisfied that she had made the right choice. She told him she expected him to work hard, to rise to the opportunity, because she believed he could. She spoke not just as an employer, but almost as a mentor, someone who had recognized the quiet strength in him and wanted to see it flourish. For the first time in years, he felt the heavy weight on his chest lift slightly, replaced by a cautious but undeniable hope. He walked out of that office with a firm handshake, a promise of employment, and the overwhelming realization that his act of kindness, the one he thought had cost him everything, had, in truth, opened the door to a new life. As he stepped back onto the busy city streets, the world seemed brighter, the noise less harsh. He thought of his child, waiting at home, unaware that their lives had just changed forever. And as he clutched the offer letter in his hands, whispered a quiet vow to himself that he would not waste this chance, that he would honor the faith she had shown in him, and that he would continue to live the way he always had, with integrity, no matter the cost. The first day at his new job felt like stepping into another world. The office floors gleamed, the hum of conversation carried an air of purpose, and the desk with his nameplate felt surreal beneath his fingertips. He wore the same old suit he had carefully pressed, but this time it didn't feel like a disguise. To hide his struggles, it felt like armor for a new beginning. Though nervous, he threw himself into his tasks with relentless energy. Every assignment was an opportunity to prove not just that he belonged, but that he could thrive. His coworkers noticed the way he listened carefully, asked thoughtful questions, and offered solutions that were simple yet effective. He didn't carry himself with arrogance, but with a quiet determination that made people respect him without him having to demand it. Each day he stayed late, double-checking his work, making sure nothing was left undone, not because anyone was watching, but because he couldn't shake the gratitude that he had been given a chance most men like him never received. At home, his child noticed the difference almost immediately. The exhaustion in his eyes was still there, but it was lighter now, softened by a spark of hope. He began bringing home stories about the projects he was working on, about how ideas he shared in meetings were being taken seriously, about how his boss believed in him. For the first time, the child saw not just a hardworking parent, but a role model. Someone who stood tall in the face of setbacks and still managed to rise. They would sit together at night, the father explaining the importance of doing things with honesty and heart, while the child listened wide-eyed, soaking in lessons that went far beyond success or money. Was inspiration. Slowly, the life that had once felt like a cage of endless struggles began to transform. The late bills stopped stacking on the table. The fridge, once half empty, now held more than enough. No longer had to juggle odd jobs that stole away his nights and weekends. He was present at school events, cheering for his child instead of apologizing for missing them. He began to save, not just survive. He replaced broken shoes, bought new clothes, and even began to dream again, dreams that stretched beyond the next rent payment, dreams of building something lasting for his child's future. The heavy chains of poverty loosened link by link, replaced by the quiet dignity of stability. Through it all, the CEO remained a steady presence. She didn't simply give him the job and step away. Instead, she took the time to mentor him, to share the wisdom she had gathered through her own years of struggle and success. She challenged him, encouraged him to push his ideas further, and reminded him that leadership wasn't about titles, but about lifting others as you climb. She knew that his act of kindness had revealed more about his character than any resume ever could, and she wanted to ensure that character had a chance to flourish on a bigger stage. Their conversations were never about charity or pity. She treated him as an equal, a man with potential who only needed the right soil to grow. Months turned into a year, and his progress became impossible to ignore. Promotions followed, responsibilities grew, and he handled each step with the same humility and determination that had brought him here. Colleagues looked to him for guidance, impressed not just by his ideas, but by the way he treated people with respect, patience, and fairness. The very qualities that had led him to stop for a stranger on the side of the road now defined him. As a leader in the workplace, his story spread quietly among those who worked with him, not because he told it, but because others admired the transformation they witnessed. At home, the changes were even more profound. His child, once shielded from the weight of his struggles, now flourished under the stability he had created. Homework was done at a proper desk instead of a kitchen counter, cluttered with overdue bills. Nights were filled with laughter and stories, not worry about whether the lights would stay on. The child spoke proudly about their parent at school, telling classmates that no matter how hard things got, they never gave up. In their eyes, he was not just a father, but a hero of the kind who taught by example that doing the right thing, even when it costs you, will always lead you where you are meant to be. The emotional climax came. One evening, when he sat alone in the living room after his child had gone to bed, the house was quiet, the glow of a lamp casting warm light on the walls. He thought back to that morning, the rushed footsteps, the open car hood, the choice that had seemed to ruin his chance forever. At the time, he had walked away crushed, convinced that his life had been derailed. But now, with everything he had gained, he saw it differently. Missing that interview had not been a loss at all. It had been the very moment that set his true future into motion. Helping that stranger had not cost him his dream, it had redefined it. He realized then that destiny doesn't always unfold the way we expect. Sometimes it waits at the edge of sacrifice, hidden behind acts of kindness that seem insignificant at the time. Tears welled in his eyes, not of sorrow, but of overwhelming gratitude. He whispered a silent thank you to the universe, to the stranger who had become his mentor, and to the values that had guided him, even in his darkest hour. As he closed his eyes, he felt peace in knowing that his child would grow up seeing what integrity truly looked like. Peace in knowing that he had kept his promise to always do the right thing. And so, his story closed not with loss, but with triumph. The narrator's voice carries the final words softly, as though reminding every listener of the truth hidden in his journey. Sometimes, the road we think we've lost is only leading us to something far greater. One act of kindness can rewrite a destiny